Same Old G posted a video yesterday about ending campaigns, where he asked about 950 times, how do you end a campaign? And from this repetition, I gather maybe that he's curious about how one ends a campaign. Where does this question come from? As I listened to him ask over and over and over and over again about how do you end a campaign, it occurred to me that, yeah, at least in my experiences online, writing a blog and other things, you really don't hear that often about people ending campaigns. It's more like the campaigns ended. Something got in the way. Players flaked, or schedules changed, or whatever, but you couldn't finish what you started. Things stopped. Things were interrupted. And so from that perspective, I can understand that how do you reach the end of a campaign might be a question, but it struck me that the actual question was, how do you end a campaign? Maybe part of that is, how do you get into a position to reach the ending, but also at the end, what do you do? How do you make the end the end? Looking back over the different campaigns I've run through the years, there are a few that ended because we wanted to do something else, like a new game was released that we were all interested in, or things had gone in a direction that no longer sparked our interests. A plan had succeeded too well, or we learned that moving into that aspect of play became too much work, like domain management. It sounded really cool until you actually started to try managing a domain, or massive invasion, a planetary invasion in BattleTech also sounded really cool. Again, until you got to all the paperwork involved in keeping track of everything. And while still fun, it wasn't the kind of fun that we had imagined when we pitched the campaign. So there are times when you just back away from a game. You just stop it. But ending a campaign, honestly, isn't that different from running one. How did you start the campaign? How did you decide exactly how to start each individual session? We knew where we had left off, and then, made some decisions about how to pick up in the next session. And this is no different. This is exactly like deciding how to end tonight's session. Where are we actually going to stop? Does it have something to do with the clock? Like we're going to play for exactly 3 hours and then suddenly stop playing and everybody logs out of Hangouts, or everyone silently packs up their stuff and goes home? I mean, it's really the same question, except, yeah, it has this finality to it. It's the last session of the campaign, and where have we gone from the beginning? For me personally, a lot of campaign endings are actually new campaigns beginning. So, I ran a World of Darkness Chronicle using the 5 main game lines, and some of them took prominence and some of them faded into the background over those years. Some were running more or less at the same time, and some only occasionally surfaced. But within that massive overarching chronicle, there were smaller campaigns which began definitely, distinctly, and they ended distinctly, but that distinct ending sparked a new beginning somewhere else. the end of a campaign is its capstone. It's probably not the thing that the players are going to remember more than their favorite events that took place during the campaign. But it gives people that sense of the next time we play, we're going to be doing something different. So for me, if we're going to have an actual end of the campaign, last session kind of event, then it's very important that the story, what has the series of events that have happened from the beginning of the campaign to the end of the campaign have to come to some kind of breaking or changing point. The status quo of the campaign world, or the situation that the characters are in, needs to change. Like, for example, in let's say some kind of RuneQuest fantasy game about freeing slaves, a great place to end the campaign would be when you free the slaves. If it's a series of mysteries, having to decide to retire a character or a group of characters from active investigations, like we see in Seven. The movie Seven is really the end of a campaign. Great last session against or series of sessions against a terrible enemy, and campaign doesn't end on a high note. It's not about, it's not all sunshine and roses, but it distinctly, definitely changes everything about the world that the characters know. That's the kind of thing I like to see in a campaign ending. I also like to see a focus on the characters and the way that they were played. I like to hear the players talking about other people's characters. So, after the game is over and we go out and we talk about the campaign, and I ask people questions, as I do during the campaign, about what their favorite moments were that other characters did, to build up those links between people. Now, even though the campaign is over, I want it to be remembered for more than just what your character did. I want it to be remembered for what everybody's character did. What was special about this particular group of players, what was special about this particular series of events, and what was special about the characters that everyone was playing. It'd be great at the end of a campaign if everyone could carry those stories forward and not only tell you their own cool game story, but tell you the stories of what their fellow players did. Now, as an example of all of this, I was once running a Vampire Chronicle set in Vancouver, and it wasn't entirely the published Vancouver. I made a lot of changes to it. And as we were going through the game, and as the players were realizing that they actually did enjoy vampire politics, our games before then had focused more on vampire mortal relationships. But this game was kind of the bridge game where I brought in more of vampire society and the struggles that these characters face. So as they realized that they really did enjoy trading boons and trying to gain control and trying to improve their status in an undead society, we started talking more and more and more about really taking a serious run at Chicago by Night. Now, we'd fooled around with the setting prior to this, but we didn't really run it as a serious campaign as intended. So this was the idea that a new storyteller in the group was going to try taking on Chicago by Night, and that we would segue from Vancouver somehow into this Chicago Chronicle that he was setting up. So a lot of things were going on in the background among the players, which was great to see someone rise up to say, I want to try being a storyteller now. And it was also cool that we were going to elevate play from, nightly hunts and dealing with kind of a very street level of campaign and move into, the halls of the elders, the halls of power, and try and make something of ourselves politically. So that put a time limit on when the Vancouver Chronicle was going to end. And interestingly enough, the events of the Chronicle managed to coincide with the conclusion of a very long storyline, which had actually been a part of 2 other short chronicles before that. So the players managed to put everything together and reach a place of real closure for their characters. And so for the very last session, not all the characters survived their attempt to, to lay this threat to rest. And we were in a situation where, almost poetically, they needed to leave the city. And I had foreseen some of this, and I was prepared for people to make a mass exodus from the city because we've been talking about going to Chicago anyway. So I set up a reason for the characters to meet one last time. They didn't have to go to this meeting, and many of them didn't. And it became a way for us to have an in-character conversation about the characters which didn't make it to the meeting. And the very last scene of the Chronicle was of one character getting on his motorcycle and driving out of town. And we were using a lot of music in those days to accentuate the emotional underpinning of certain scenes. And I played a track that no one in the group had heard before, but which really nailed the core of that particular character. So as that particular character rides off into the night, I'm playing this song which had become for me that character's theme song. And the player agreed. It's a great way to put an end to that chronicle. Now, we saw some of those characters again. They resurfaced in Chicago, but they resurfaced, changed as new people. And part of what made that possible was allowing them to get together, or encouraging them to get together and talk about everything that they'd been through and say goodbye to each other. And really, in the end, that's what the end of a campaign is. The players saying goodbye to it, the characters saying goodbye to the situation that they're into, and getting ready to move on to something new. So, how do you end a campaign? Figure out what it is about that campaign that is unique. Focus on the characters and the important events, and bring that last session to a natural end. Be sensitive to what is going to be the last thing said in that campaign. What is going to be the last scene? Don't force it. Don't write it. Just let it close.